Hey, Unchainers! This is Timmert, and you're listening to the Unchaining Me podcast. Hello and welcome, dear listener, to another episode of the Unchaining Me podcast. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really glad that you stopped by. Thank you for all the support you guys show me on many different platforms, not just the podcast. It truly encourages me and keeps me going. So I'd like to say thank you before I begin today's podcast. This one is for most of the people I know. This topic, I think, touches us in one way or another, and especially being an Ethiopian, growing up in its culture, this is a demon that I continue to struggle to defeat within myself. And more often than not, I meet people that are doing the same thing on different levels, affected to a different degree. Do you care so deeply about what other people say, to the point where it debilitates you from making a move? Do you wonder how they may judge you, what they may talk about behind your back, if they understand you, if they don't, and why? Do you think about these things so often that your life, separate from what other people's opinions may be, sounds really or seems really clouded? Now, this episode is going to be for you. This episode, I'm going to discuss what that is, where that comes from, this need for approval, this need to be seen by other people in a good light, where that all comes from. Why are we obsessed with that? What is it about our culture that ingrained that in us? And how is it serving us if it is? How is it not serving us if it's not? And to what extent can we exercise that and remain sane and remain productive and remain healthy and actually have goals and dreams that may not make everybody agree with us and support us and go after those goals and dreams and chase them and actually be able to achieve greatness? How do we stop from being chained by the potential of disapproval in others? Why do criticisms cripple us so much? Sometimes even the thought of being criticized. And what are some points to keep in mind in our path to be unchained from caring so much about what other people say? Well, let me talk about myself from, the get-go. I cared so deeply about what other people thought of me, about what they perceived me to be, about what they understood. I spent most of my life trying to curate the narrative that people had about me and my life, about what I did or didn't do, about my mistakes and triumphs and potentials, and you name it. It's almost like I lived my life through the glasses of others every step of the way. It could be my parents, it could be my teachers, my friends, exes, audiences. Oh my goodness, like social media makes this an even more crippling demon to deal with, because we're not really catering to the audience of 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 anymore. It's thousands now. It's hundreds now. It's everybody that could have an opinion about that picture we posted now, or couldn't have an opinion, right? Why didn't she comment on that? What could she be thinking? Why didn't she support me in what I'm doing? Why isn't she sharing what I write? It could be really crippling. So most of my life, I could tell you That's what I thought. And it fueled my self-loathing. It fueled my inactivity and the things that I wasn't able to accomplish in my life. It was fueled by this fear that if I dare do something that's out of the ordinary for a certain group of people or a certain culture, if I dare question or doubt some things, what would people say about me? And that was something that brought into my life majority of the mental illness that I suffered with. Depression and anxiety are closely related to our sense of belonging in a certain culture, in a certain group of people, and how other people view us. If there is a tainted view of other people, of us, that we perceive, that affects our mental well-being. We are preoccupied with those thoughts and expectations and fear that it's borderline impossible to feel joyous and to see potential in us. And I have gone through paths in life where I've met people who are stuck in dead and abusive marriages because the thought of them getting divorced or moving on would trigger so much disapproval from other people, from their culture, from their religion, that they stay there, unhappy, traumatized. There are many people who say, I would love to do this. This is my secret passion. I would have started a business if it wasn't for what other people could say if I failed. This goes all the way back to our childhoods. As we are, we're seldom communicated to us that was enough. We were seldom approved. We were hardly approved, if at all, for exactly who we are, for our gifts, for our talents. The worth that we have just by existing, just for being, was not communicated. The love that was given to us, in many cases than not, was conditional. You get good grades, mom and dad are happy. You entertain guests, and of course you need to know when to stop and when to go back to your room or go outside and play. My mom used to communicate just using her eyes. Whenever there's people around, she would let us know that there's certain behavior that's acceptable and we need to step into that role. It's almost like being in character. It's almost like you're in a movie. And there's a certain way that you have to be so that those people approve her and her parenting through approving us and how we are as kids. That was constantly reinforced. Then you start thinking, if I look a certain way, I am considered beautiful. If I straighten my hair, that is the epitome of beauty. And of course, being measured by how well you perform in tests and exams also communicates that conditional approval that you have of yourself. Bear in mind, it used to be something that your parents and other people had of you, but then you take over. We take over and we take it upon ourselves to either approve or disapprove ourselves as we go. So we invite the judge to come and take hold and stay in our minds. It's actually no surprise that we are terrified of what other people may say of us. Sometimes we should be terrified about what we say of us when we do something and we fail, or when we want so bad something but we don't go after it. We don't have enough courage to go after it. Then how we abuse ourselves through our words and through our thoughts. So it's no surprise that we almost expect it and allow it when it comes from other people. And this can incorporate tending to our physical appearances so much. I can't begin to tell you how many times I rehearse what I wear when I go out. Okay, am I covering the parts that I don't like and I perceive others to judge? Do I look my part? Do I look like a mom? Do I embody that role and how my costume is set up for that day? Is it grocery store appropriate? It could also be about making life choices. It could be as big as making life choices. If I move, what would people say? If I get divorced, what would people say? If I don't work using this degree that I've spent years achieving, what would then people say? If I create a boundary between myself and this person who seems to drain the life and the peace out of me, who brings so much drama around me, what would people say? Making huge relationship choices is something that we pass through the lens of other people's opinions. It could also be what we choose to say to other people. What would she say if I told her this? What would he say if I was open about that? If I am vulnerable about my trauma or my issues or my depression, what would people say? And it's so funny for a person who cared so deeply about what other people thought of her to create podcasts and share her relationship, issues, her mistakes. By no means I've shared all of them, by the way. I mean, if I podcast about all of them, then you're not going to buy my book, let's face it. So I'm saving some of them for later. Stay tuned. But it baffles me sometimes how I was scared, motionless when I thought about what other people thought of me. And now there's thousands of people that pay attention to what I write and what I say, what I record. And I've never felt freer in my whole life. I've never accepted myself, good, bad, ugly, and who says anyway, to the point where I go with what feels right and what my heart finds at peace. So why are we that way in the first place? Why do we care so deeply? And, we crave attention, positive attention. We want others to see us in a positive light, in a particular light. And this need for approval, it has been conditioned in us since birth. Thank our primal instincts and evolution for this need to matter and need to be taken in positive light. Because at some point in our very distant past, we needed it for survival. Approval meant that we became or remained part of a certain group. It gave us a sense of belonging, which meant safety, which meant food and shelter and love, which are all primal for our survival and our blossoming. Belonging, a sense of belonging, is something that is as needed as food and water for us to thrive as human beings. Approval meant a higher sense of self-esteem. Yes, it's called self-esteem. It's something that you develop about the self, about who you are. But it has been predominantly based on what other people thought of us or what they said about us. Recognition alters the way we value ourselves. That has also been something that has been conditioned in us. When someone recognizes what you've done or recognizes something about you that is considered of worth, you feel good. Now, we may not be able to overcome all of this. Because again, evolution is a very slow process. And these changes don't happen overnight or even over a few generations. It takes years and years. And it's also based on what we need to adapt to the ever-changing environment. So yes, individualism and realizing our worth, inherent worth, not based on what we do or what we look like. It's something that is slowly being woven into the fabric of humanity. And to some extent, the caring about what other people think make us a good social animal too. It has its place. It has its perks or benefits to it. You know, we want to be able to censor what we say so we don't hurt people, right? If you just spoke sometimes as you thought, yes, it's better not to think it, but hey, the thought is there. If you spoke exactly like that to someone, you may cause hurt. It's better to censor what you say at times, right? If you're going to prevent hurting other people. It's a very good idea to act professionally in an interview. It's a very good idea to dress like you would on that job that you're being interviewed to. It's a very good idea. It just might land you the job. And maybe one of the reasons you get the job. But this altering and shifting to fit other people's expectations and needs and wants is problematic when it becomes people pleasing, when it creates anxiety, when we try to alter who we are too many times around too many people. It creates codependency. These are the things that are fueled by it: anxiety, depression, codependent relationships. What level of it is healthy? That is something that we really need to know for ourselves. And that requires a lot of introspection. That requires a lot of awareness and being very honest with yourselves about where and how do you incorporate this skill to adjust how you are or what you say, but to what extent do you allow it to be problematic in your lives? That is something that you need to be very honest with yourselves about. How far or how deep are we willing to go down that road of caring about what other people say? Because most probably these things were communicated to us and conditioned in us on a very deep level. I know it has been for me. My parents, God bless their hearts, and I loved them to death. They communicated with me that we as a family were not worthy as we were. We as people, me as a daughter, me as a girl, me as a human being, that I wasn't enough as I was. These things were communicated to us in very subtle ways. You would hear how your older sibling was being talked about. Your older sibling's life choices were being communicated to other people. You would hear something that they've done being concealed, something that they're going through being hidden, sometimes even being lied about. You would hear, they would be in the house, but they would ask you to tell the person who's knocking at the door that they weren't in the house. So you start piecing the pieces or like gluing the pieces together, and you're thinking, okay, then how things are and how I am and how we are needs alteration, because other people will have opinions about it that affect us somehow, right? Then why would we lie about it? If those opinions didn't matter, if they didn't affect us, then why the need to create falsehood around these realities? And it wouldn't really hit home until I went to college to study to become a health officer. It was Most of you may not even know it if you didn't grow up in Ethiopia, but it's this field that was created to fast forward the health professionals' path to being able to, treat patients. So in the whole medical professionals hierarchy, a health officer was somewhere between a nurse and a doctor, but not quite a doctor. So there was that stigma attached to it. There was that you almost made it, but you're not really as smart enough, and you weren't chosen to become a doctor, but you could just become a health officer. So there was that. And I had a hard time accepting it because I was a good student growing up, quote unquote. I had good grades. And yes, I fell off the wagon in high school, but everybody was saying, oh, you are a doctor. You're going to be a doctor. And one of my sisters is a physician. She was in medical school then. So everybody was like, oh, doctor number 2. So this was something that people already set for me to become a medical doctor. And I know this reality is true for many of my Ethiopian Eritrean brothers and sisters. And I went to the university and, life continued. And I remember I came back for my first break home, and one of my aunties said to me, so how's medical school going? I remember just freezing because in that moment I had to decide to play along, because me telling her I wasn't in medical school was going to make my parents liars, and everything that people are going to say about that, you don't want that. But it communicated with me in that moment when I played along with the lie that my parents thought I wasn't worthy, and their need for approval was something that I in turn have to take over and also add to my life. And that's exactly what I did. And I know many people would have different stories, but it's going to be some part of this kind of conditioning. It's going to be someone in their lives valuing someone else's opinion so much that this is communicated to us, and we also then take it over. So now is how other people think or view us interfering with our intuition? That is the biggest question we need to be able to answer. Are we giving it so much value, so much space that we are dialing down on our own inner knowing? Are we debilitated by the thought of what the opinions of others will be? Are we looking out rather than within? Our sense of self and sense of place, have those become clouded? The more we focus on the external approvals, the more we establish or attempt to establish these sensibilities through external means, the more clouded our vision becomes, and the farther away we go from our authentic selves. Instead of being fully present in our social interactions, our thoughts and behavior become means for eliciting a response, making that person like us, rather than an expression of self-value. How many of us, when we are talking to other people, when we are showing up at work, in our relationships, in our parenting, how many of us truly show up as our authentic selves? Or how many of us use those interactions as a means to be approved one way or another? That is the biggest question that's going to help us realize where the work needs to be done. The ego is a collection of these facades, these external identities and all the stories that we have created and accepted in order to have some kind of context as we perceive our life experiences. The ego, as I always like to say, is like a shell. And we are like the chicks inside that eggshell. That shell served a purpose of protecting and nourishing and sheltering, keeping that chick warm until a certain level when the chick actually needs to break the shell and move on and fly on. Now, if the eggshell insists on being there intact, what happens to the chick? It dies. That's the ego. The ego is like that shell. Based on what our realities were, based on what has happened to us or what was done to us or what we did, the ego creates a sense of identity because it has to survive. It has to make sense of what's going on around it, what has been done to it, what has it done. But there has to be a time where, as adults, we grow aware, intentionally aware, that we are separate from that ego. That the ego does not define us. It doesn't mean killing it altogether. I don't even know if that's possible. But it means consciously and intentionally living beyond the ego, deeper than that, through acquiring our inner self, our authentic selves. Acquiring may not actually be a good word because it tells you that you need to get it from outside. No, realizing rather. Realizing that we have that authentic self and that's who we are. This script called the ego, this facade, it's our self-image. It's a mask we wear, a social mask. This roles that we play. And that thrives on approval. So if we want to live a life that doesn't get debilitated by the approval of others or the opinions of others, we need to be able to live beyond the ego. That need for approval that comes from the ego is driven by self-criticism. That's at the end of it, that we're not enough, that we're not good. And that negative self-talk keeps it alive. These are all fear-based. We fear that we don't have it. That fear, it derives from any number of sources, right? That concerning fear of rejection, we feel that feeling of less than, and that as a mentality, we feel it like we fear that less than mentality, that someone else is better than us. We've been disapproving ourselves our entire lives. And we haven't really succeeded, have we? We haven't done the things that we want to do, that deep down we're capable of, by disapproving ourselves. So why don't we try it on the flip end of things? Why don't we start approving ourselves, regardless of what other people say? Why don't we see how that works out for us? And self-approval, it can only come from accepting ourselves. It cannot come any other way but through self-acceptance. We are, in fact, just enough, just as we are. We need to be able to realize that in order for self-approval to follow. We no longer need to look for validation from the outside. We can give it to ourselves. How? How do we do that? How do we not get crippled by the need to be validated and approved by other people? How do we follow our hearts and do what we feel is right, even though it may not be the popular choice, or it may be something that people may not expect from us? How do we do that? We have to create a new mindset. That's the only way how. A new mindset. How do we interact with ourselves? Through thoughts. How do we interact with other people? Through words that used to be thoughts. right? Through emotions that used to be thoughts. Words, thoughts, emotions, not in that order, actually. Thoughts, emotions, words are our currencies of communication with ourselves and with others. So now the shift in mindset, the creating a new mindset begins with our thoughts. So we better watch for those thoughts. We better question them when we find them. And when I say those thoughts, it is the thoughts that make us feel as though we're not enough. As though unless someone else approves us, unless there's a like on that photo, hopefully hundreds of them, unless there's a bunch of positive comments under a post, that we haven't made it or aren't approved or aren't good enough. I go through that. Thankfully, there isn't a lot of negativity on my page. But from time to time, I comment something somewhere or I post something where someone comes on and says something negative. Just a couple of weeks ago, I posted about being the most overweight I've been in my life, but also the most deeply in love with myself I've been all my life. And that was it. That's all I communicated. The love that I have for myself, regardless of the number on the scale. And majority of it was that of love and agreement, and many people also wanting that for themselves. But a few people came in and accused me of normalizing obesity and giving up and wanting to eat more, and this being an excuse. The first thought that came to my mind as I read those comments was that of dread. That of almost being an imposter. Can I be a life coach as I am overweight? I went, after all the work that I've done, I went through those corners of doubting my worth to be doing what I do. Do I have what it takes? Because this person disapproved me. That is what we need to be watchful of. Don't worry about why the thought was there in the first place. That's not worth wasting your energy on. It was there. Thank your conditioning. Thank the subconscious mind. It insists sometimes. And do we get to a place where those thoughts aren't problems anymore? They don't arise? I do not know. Hopefully. But I know that in the meantime, as hopeful as I am to not be bothered by those thoughts at all, that I know it's worse if I don't pay attention to the first rising of the thought. The second thought makes it worse. The third makes it even worse. And then it becomes an emotion. And then it becomes a mood and the way I am and an agreement I make with myself and the way I communicate with my loved ones. And then it goes haywire from there. So my practice is to question my thought. And I did. Instead of wanting to respond, that is from my ego, many ways that I could respond. I could create something to make them approve me, or I could fight it out. I could say something back and somehow win, if that's even a thing, winning. But what I spent my energy and attention on was questioning the thoughts that were arising within me. Do I need their approval? I do not. Did I say something that was true for me? Yes, I did. Did I alter my reality to find some kind of approval or validation from others? No, I didn't. And that is something I can live behind, whatever the response may be, whatever the opinion of others may be. So questioning your thoughts is a great place to start. And you know what? Reality check. People don't really care, think, and obsess about us as much as we think they do. It's really not that much. I know there were months where I sat in my room depressed, going from one person to another in my head, like this is no exaggeration, months, numbing myself with drugs. I went down the path of wondering what people said. And of course, I thought about everything negative, and I stayed tied, glued to my couch and my bed. And I realized that people actually live their lives. They make their own mistakes, obsess over someone else after a certain period. They're not really that interested when you think about it. It's a temporary fixation, and then they move on to their issues. You're not really that interesting for too long for many people. I don't say that in a belittling way, by no means. I say that in a freeing way, in an unchaining way, so that you go back to doing you. The other thing you need to pay attention to is that self-reflection, self-love, self-acceptance cannot happen unless you befriend you. You gotta spend time with yourself. You gotta know who you are. And I mean that in the deepest sense of the word. You gotta find out who you are and learn to love and value yourself. You are the only you got. And that process is going to allow self-approval. And self-approval can only come from self-acceptance. You can't accept something you don't know. Most of us have not spent that time in solitude, not loneliness, but solitude, to really know who we are. What are our aversions? What are we so good at? What do people come to us for? What do we like? Who are we? What do we think of life, of God, of the afterlife? Truly, not seeing it through the lens of what other people have made us think or made us believe, but who are we and what do we know? What do we believe? What do we want? That requires time, energy, and attention to master. And once we get there, we gotta love what we see, right? And then comes my next point. Perfection is a myth. We are not going to be perfect. We are not perfect. Thank God we're not perfect. So loving what we find once we get to know each other is key. That's self-acceptance piece right there. That's the self-approval piece that then follows. The next piece is also very important, and that is find your tribe. If you have to build it from scratch, do it. If you have to leave a tribe that was used to approving you constantly and cannot cope with the new you, cannot get on with the curriculum and shift their paradigm, then leave. Build another one. When you are in that frame of mind with yourself, the frame of mind of finding time to get to know and approve yourself and love yourself and accept yourself with no perfection, then there is this magical, almost borderline magical way of you attracting like-minded people. You get your people. You find your people. When you cultivate authenticity, people who vibrate with that frequency become your people too. You become like a magnet for like-minded people. And before you know it, you have a tribe. You have a sense of belonging. And you know what? You don't need their approval, and they don't need to approve you, and they don't need your approval. You may choose to entertain their feedback and all its positive notions, but you won't rely on it. You won't be debilitated by their decision to not approve you. And the last point I want to make, and it's a very powerful one too, is being okay with being misunderstood. Watch yourself next time you feel someone misunderstood you. imagine just being okay by it. Of course, if it's an intimate relationship, clarity and understanding is important. So you want to be able to take your time, find the right time, and really be vulnerable and really ask questions, not close-ended questions, but open questions, and reaffirming and encouraging them to speak, and also have them do the same for you, so you get to a place of understanding through effective communication. Yes. But when it comes to people, other people, your audiences, your people on social media, that friend from years ago, that stranger, it's okay if they drive away misunderstanding you. It's okay if they comment and you don't comment back and set the record straight. It's okay if they have a wrong notion of you in mind and hold on to that. People do that anyway, by the way. Unless they are devoted to forming a good communication relationship, thriving, intimate relationship with you, unless they have something to gain by doing that, unless they have that kind of interest in you, people are most likely going to remain intact with what they think of you anyway. Because that's what makes them feel like winners. That's what makes them feel like they know it and they know you. And people don't want to be uncomfortable. People are uncomfortable with the unknown. So if you are unfigureoutable, they're going to be uncomfortable. So they're going to create a notion of you, an idea of you, an image of you. Maybe what they know you to be in the past gives them comfort because that's the known territory, right? And they could hold on to that forever. Be okay with that. What matters is, at the end of the day, your authentic self is finding a way to be lived out loud through you. What matters is you're following your intuition. You are turning down the noise and dialing up your intuition, your gut feeling, your knowing, your inner compass, and you're following that. That is what matters. And it's my hope for you going on with your days, with your nights, and your lives after listening to this podcast, that you pay close attention to in what ways you seek approval, you seek validation from others, in what ways you allow other people's expectations and chatters and noise to cloud your judgment, your focus, your intuition. And please, whenever you get a chance, share with me how that is like for you. Share with me how this podcast has helped you. Share with me with which point exactly resonated with you the most. I look forward to hearing your stories, your success stories, your aha moments and paradigm shifts. Thank you so much. And don't forget to support by liking, rating, subscribing, and sharing with your family and friends. Thank you so much, and see you with the next episode.